Chapter 151. Maybe it's because of the incident at the Michelin restaurant? Louis's words changed Willow's expression. Fortunately, Larissa did not say anything, which made her calm down a little. The price on the screen stopped at $266 million. And the last person to tender a bid was Madame Nera from the Peach Room. Maisie was surprised and curiously looked at the distinguished guest of the Peach Room. The person who was sitting at the window turned out to be Madame Nera. The price that had stopped rose again to $282 million abruptly. The audience was astounded. The auctioneer was stunned for a moment and then slowly said, "Congratulations to the distinguished guests from the stork room located on the second floor." Maisie turned her head and looked at Helios. "Mr. Boucher, you." Helios gave off a faint smile. "A brilliant masterpiece is worth the price." Madame Nera frowned when she looked at the person who was sitting in the stork room. "It turns out to be that kiddo from the Boucher? The value has gone up again." When Maisie heard the voice coming from downstairs, she turned her head and looked at the screen. The $282 million had suddenly become $313 million. Who in the world is so freaking rich? Congratulations to the distinguished guests from the Peach. Congratulations to the distinguished guests from the Stork. Congratulations to the distinguished. The auctioneer was stunned by the ever-increasing prices on the screen. She stopped announcing it in the end and just stood there, watching as the number kept growing. The price on the screen had become $470 million in such a short period of time. The buyers in the audience did not even bother to look at it anymore. There was no way that they could beat the capitalists on the second floor when it came to spending money. Maisie grabbed Helios as cold sweat beads were starting to form on her forehead. "Forget it, Mr. Boucher. You don't have to bid anymore." She had a faint idea of who was the guest in the bamboo room. Who else could it be apart from him? Helios already knew who was the guest in the bamboo room and sneered when he saw Maisie's nervous look. "It's okay, I'm only bidding for fun. He doesn't need the money anyway." Maisie was rendered speechless. A best friend who would set up his friend, this fella really knows how to be Nolan's best friend. The thin lips of the man sitting in the bamboo room were tightly pressed until the person under the stage rang the bell and announced, "Congratulations to the VIP from the bamboo room for successfully bidding the second Peacock's Pride." Another round of applause came from the audience. The highest price, 000,000 struck for the night. Maisie had done it, but she could not feel happy. There was a knock on the door of the stork room. The bodyguard opened the door. As expected, it was Quincy who was standing outside the door. Quincy took a glance at Helios and smiled slightly at Maisie. "Ms. Vanderbilt. Mr. Goldman is waiting for you." Maisie followed Quincy to the bamboo room and really saw Nolan sitting on a soft cushion with his legs crossed, looking at her. His brows were slightly creased while his thin lips were slightly opened. "Have you gotten together with Helios?" Not only did this woman not tell me anything about coming to an auction house, but she also went into Helios' private room. They've only met each other for that one time. And that bastard already can't get his filthy mind off her. Gotten together with him? Why does this sound a little strange? Maisie scoffed. "Mr. Goldman, you really worry too much. I don't plan to be torn apart by the fans of the best actor." Nolan stretched out his hand, pulled her into his arms, sat her down, placed his palm on her waist, and pinched her chin gently with the other hand. "You don't have to wait for his fans to tear you apart. I'll tear you apart first." Maisie was rendered speechless. Nolan looked at her. "Your objective for tonight has been achieved." "Yes, thanks to you, Mr. Goldman, who spent $470 million to bid for my jewelry." Maisie pushed him away lightly. Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he held her back and pulled her waist closer to him. "How are you going to thank me?" His breath lingered at the tip of her nose, and she felt that the hand on her waist was getting warmer and warmer. Thus, she subconsciously jumped away from him as far as possible. I wasn't the one who begged you to bid, so why should I thank you? Chapter 152. Sometimes, I really dislike the things that come out of your mouth. Then don't kiss me. Nolan did not expect that she would say so. He frowned and pinched her chin. You're the one who's asking for it. He sealed her lips with his immediately. Maisie resisted a little in his arms, but she was suddenly crushed tightly by him. He then lowered his voice and stared at her passionately and greedily. Don't move around, do you want this to turn into something even deeper? Maisie did not say a single word. Mr. Goldman. Quincy's voice came from outside the door. Maisie quickly got up and away from him. This man is really too contemptible. Quincy pushed the door, came in, and said, Mr. Goldman. Madame Nara from the Peach Room invites you and Ms. Vanderbilt to go over to her room. Maisie and Nolan walked out of the bamboo room and ran into the Lucas family and Willow in the corridor. When Willow saw that Nolan was still holding Maisie's hand, her eyes could not help but turn gloomy. Damn it, I originally wanted to ruin this bitch's reputation, but who would have thought that she would be able to dodge such a huge bullet again? Maisie was also wearing a masquerade mask. She did not wear any high heels tonight. She was 5'4" in height and looked like a tiny kitten while she was standing beside Nolan, who was 6'1" in height. Madam Lucas and Mr. Lucas are here too, Nolan spoke indifferently. Larissa took a glance at the young lady beside him and smiled gracefully. This must be Mr. Goldman's girlfriend. Nolan looked at Maisie and answered, she's my fiancée. Maisie was startled. She wanted to shake his hand away, but Nolan tightened his grasp. My fiancé, and I have something to attend to. So we'll take our leave first. Nolan gave off a faint smile and took Maisie away. Lewis's hands were clenched in his pockets, and his eyes were dimmed as he turned his head to take another look at Nolan. He suddenly recalled the appearances of the kids. They resemble Mr. Goldman so much. Quincy took a peek at them and wondered deep down as he saw Willow tagging along with them. This woman actually became so close with Mr. Lucas as soon as she ascertained that she couldn't be together with Mr. Goldman? In addition to Madame Nara. Kennedy was also in the Peach Room. When Madame Nara saw the two walking in, she put down the teacup in her hand, looked at Maisie, and snorted. I've always been curious about what you said the other day, but I really didn't expect you to be the genius jewelry designer, Zora. Why didn't you tell me directly that you're Zora? I wouldn't have realized her identity if it hadn't been for Kennedy. Maisie removed the mask that she had prepared for the masquerade and walked toward Madame Nara with a smile. Madame Nara, you wouldn't believe me either. Even if I were to explain it the other day. Madame Nara paused and curled her lips. You're right. If you couldn't show me some real tricks, I really wouldn't believe that you're Zora. The corners of Nolan's lips were raised slightly. It seems that Madame Nara likes the peacock's pride designed by my fiancé. Maisie glared at him. Fiancé, nothing has been confirmed apart from the kids, you're quite good at concealing yourself, huh? Madame Nara laughed admiringly. Not only did she not mention her identity as the world-renowned designer Zora that day, but she also did not talk about her relationship with Nolan. Since she's able to convince me with her sincere attitude, this young lady isn't any ordinary woman. No wonder Kennedy is willing to assist her. However, you won, Madame Nara said while looking at her. Maisie was helpless and said in a complaining tone, my people bid for the item, so how can that be considered a success? Her people? Nolan squinted. Did she just acknowledge me? Madame Nara shook her head with a serious expression. Even if Mr. Goldman didn't bid it, I'd bid it myself. It's not the price, but your sincerity that has moved me. At least, you've made everyone witness the charm of Tanzanite. Chapter 153. Probably because Madame Nara had underestimated Maisie before this, the former felt rather embarrassed because she had almost made a bad judgment. However, she still had to maintain her reputation, so she said proudly, so, get Kennedy to come over tomorrow to renew the contract. I'll share my Tanzanite supply chain with you, but in return, don't let me down. Maisie laughed. Yes, Madame Nara. Nolan stared at Maisie, who Madame Nara deeply appreciated. Although this woman likes to play tricks, she was able to obtain Madame Nara's recognition without any assistance from anyone. It's difficult to dislike her independent and tough temperament. However, Nolan also felt very defeated and frustrated deep down because his woman did not want to rely on him. Hashtag Zora outclassed new designer Willow Vanderbilt. Hashtag after the two identical auction items had been announced at the Somerton auction hall last night, Zora and Willow had successfully secured themselves a spot on Google Trends. It was apparent to the eyes as soon as the netizens looked at the comparison between the two pieces of jewelry. Thus, everyone online started questioning and mocking Willow's act of plagiarizing Zora's design, which did not turn out too well. Some netizens even uploaded pictures of Gothic-style masterpieces that Willow had put forward before this. The details of all the designs looked very similar to those vintage jewelry designs that Zora had come up with while she was abroad. There were only minor changes in the design language. Hashtag Southerwood. Hashtag Willow really did plagiarize in order to get famous, didn't she? Hashtag Peppa's Hammer. Hashtag Zora's design doesn't have a dominant design language. Through her design language, embellishments have always been finishing touches that would shock the public visually all the time. Her designs have always looked very comfortable, non-conflicting, and simple. Hashtag Shitsack Netizen. Hashtag I believe that all designers have their own style. It's just that Zora is more famous. It doesn't necessarily mean that Willow has plagiarized her designs. Many reporters gathered at the entrance of Vena Jewelry, and Willow had been hiding in her office and did not dare to go out. She trembled out of wrath upon seeing that most of the online posts and comments questioned her plagiarism act. Layla looked out of the window, saw that the reporters had refused to leave, and walked to Willow hurriedly. Willie, we don't have to be afraid of anything, no matter what, the design sketches are in our possession. We can post a clarification on Twitter and Facebook now. All of Freddie's design sketches are in my possession, as long as I publish all of them and then pay Freddie more money to speak up on Willie's behalf. Why should we be afraid of the public's opinion? Willow felt that this was indeed a way. However, her social media accounts had been blocked, so she could only use Vena's official accounts to release a statement. Willow uploaded the sketches to prove that she was not involved in any plagiarism. She also denied everything that had something to do with the incident from last night's auction and claimed that she was the first designer to release the design, denying that she had copied Zora's work. The statement implied that the latter was the one that should be suspected of plagiarism. At the Black Gold Group, on the 16th floor. When Maisie saw the statement that was posted through Vena's official Twitter and Facebook accounts, she knew that it was Willow's doing. It just so happened that her Seoul studio would be officially listed today, so she released all the products that were designed using retro, Gothic designs concept on Seoul Studio's webpage. On Twitter, hashtag Seoul Jewelry Studio official, hashtag Vena Jewelry official. During the period in which my jewelry studio got listed, I discovered that your company has been using my studio's original manuscripts to create new design sketches. I didn't want to escalate the matter, but I realized that I still couldn't tolerate plagiarism at the end of the day. Please check the photos for my studio's registration date and the date when all the manuscripts were created. As soon as this Twitter post was published, all netizens were in an uproar. Some questioned that Seoul Jewelry Studio was trying to use this incident as a stepping stone to catapult themselves into fame. Some questioned Willow's plagiarism, while some others questioned that this was a PR trick that both companies were using to create hype online. All sorts of comments could be seen on all social media platforms, and Willow, who was sitting in front of the computer, was astonished. Seoul Jewelry Studio, what kind of studio is that? Chapter 154. How could they have manuscripts that look exactly like Freddie's, and the date when the manuscripts were created is earlier than those Freddie gave me? Willie, what the hell is going on? Layla started acting fidgety. Willow quickly took out her cell phone to call Freddie but could not reach him because his cell phone had been turned off. She was stupefied at that moment. It must be Freddie's doing. She immediately issued a clarification, pushed all the blame on Freddie, and claimed that Freddie Fuller was one of Haley & Company, jewelry's designers. However, Haley & Company, jewelry posted a statement on Twitter within a few hours. Hashtag Haley & Company, jewelry official, hashtag Haley & Company, jewelry doesn't have a designer whose name is Freddie Fuller. And we've never cooperated with that Vena Jewelry. A gentle reminder, all companies should remember to keep their eyes wide open and get to the bottom of all collaboration details before they enter a collaboration with other companies. Haley & Company. Jewelry's official post turned Willow and Vena Jewelry into a laughingstock in an instant. The netizens ridiculed that Vena had been deceived and even laughed at Willow's decision to manufacture jewelry based on stolen designs from another company. Some even made Willow's selfies into emojis and memes. For one whole morning, Willow had been ridiculed by groups and groups of netizens and got squeezed into Google Trends' top search results. Hashtag Willow's talents are stolen. Hashtag just when Willow was sweeping all the documents and decorations off her desk exasperatedly after reading all those posts and comments, Stephen appeared outside the office with a sulky expression. Layla trembled and then quickly walked up to Stephen. Dear. Don't trust those comments on the internet. Stephen slapped Layla, and she staggered to the side. She then covered her cheek and looked at him in a daze. Take a look at the daughter that you brought up. I'm extremely disappointed with the both of you. Seeing that her mother was slapped, Willow immediately looked at her father's expression, and it was only natural that she was very scared. Dad, I'm sorry, it's all my fault. Willow ran up to Stephen, knelt to the floor, and cried. You can hit me, I'm the one who cannot withdraw myself from the obsession. That's the reason I was coined by that person and did such things. So please don't hit Mom. Willow was good at putting her tears into good use and also putting herself in a vulnerable position. Seeing that Willow was kneeling on the floor, crying her eyes out, and begging himself, he wavered. Even though Stephen was truly enraged by Willow's actions, he was still a soft-hearted man. I was the one who pampered and spoiled her so much back then that I've turned her into someone like this. He took a deep breath. You don't have to come to the company anymore in the future. I realize that I can't trust you to manage the company. Willow was stunned. She then lowered her head while biting her lips bitterly. So what if I don't have Vena? I still hold the identity of the daughter of the De Arma. In the end, Stephen came forward to apologize and assume all accountability. Maisie's eyes gradually dimmed when she saw the video of her father coming out to apologize to the public on Willow's behalf. Although she now knew more about the past between her mother and father, she would still feel sad when she thought about the fact that she had become an irrelevant existence to the Vanderbilts. However, thinking of today's incident, Father would most probably not allow Willow to manage Vena ever again. Although Father might not consider handing Vena to Willow in the future, it's obvious that Layla and Grandma still have their eyes on Vena. What are you thinking about? A voice came from behind her. Maisie was so frightened that she trembled, turned her head, and rubbed her lips against his cold lips while doing so. Nolan was standing behind her, leaning over, and propping his upper body against the desk, so the distance between the both of them was very close. It seemed that this was the scene that he had been waiting for, and he was very satisfied with the outcome. Are you taking advantage of me? Maisie's eyelashes twitched, and she moved away from him subconsciously to create distance. Do you think that you're taking less advantage of me? Chapter 155. Nolan's gaze landed on her computer's monitor, which happened to be showing the video of Stephen's apology. He frowned and placed his hands on her shoulders. But when his fingertips touched her skin, she trembled from head to toe as if an electric current traveled through her body. The man stood behind her and kneaded her shoulders gently for her. Anyone would definitely suffer from a jaw drop if they were to witness this scene. The exceptionally regal Mr. Goldman would actually give someone else a massage? Nolan suddenly suggested indifferently, "Do you want me to accompany you back to the Vanderbilt Manor for a meal?" "I'm sorry, but the Vanderbilts don't welcome me." "You should go to Willow if you're looking for a free meal, ugh." "It hurts, this bag is actually giving it all he has." Nolan leaned over and approached her ear. "I know that you're jealous of Willow. But I've never taken the initiative to go back to the Vanderbilt Manor with Willow before this. Judging solely on this, you've already won." "Hee hee, then who was the person who left me on the road the other night?" Maisie chuckled. Nolan pressed his lips together tightly, turned her chair abruptly, propped his arms on the armrests of the chair, and circled her in front of him. "I'll let you leave me on the road for a while so that you'll be able to vent your spleen. What do you think?" Maisie looked up at Nolan. "Am I seeing this right?" Why would Nolan? Why would he change his attitude just to please me, and he's even begging for forgiveness? This domineering and unreasonable man seemed to have gotten closer to her, just when she was staring at him in a daze. The man's soft lips approached her face in an instant and they were already covering her own lips in a matter of a split second. Maisie was taken aback. She lifted her hand to block him but could not push him away. His breath surrounded her. But she seemed to have gotten used to this and started to respond to his kiss. Nolan retracted his gaze and supported the back of her head as the kiss intensified. He wanted more. Kennedy suddenly opened the door and rushed in. Maisie returned to her senses instantly, pushed away Nolan, and turned her chair around immediately. Kennedy realized that he had entered at a bad time and said, "I'll come again later." He went out again and closed the door. Nolan was not afraid of what would happen if Kennedy discovered them. He glanced at the woman's flushed ear and brushed his lips with his fingertips as a hint of triumph gradually surfaced in his eyes. "If you want to go back to the Vanderbilt Manor to see your father at any time, call me." Seeing Nolan's departing figure, Maisie became more and more apprehensive. "Did I get possessed by some spirits just now? Not only did I not resist him, but I was also very involved." Her eyes dimmed gradually. "Habit is a terrible thing, I can't get used to that." At the Lucas family's mansion, Larissa held a blue-eyed Persian cat, sat on the couch, and started grooming it. She watched as the housekeeper brought Willow in while Willow was carrying a gift box in her hand. She only raised her eyelids. "There's no need to bring any gifts in the future." Willow bit her lips lightly and smiled. "I don't feel too good about coming here to visit you empty-handed." Larissa lifted her head and glanced at Willow with a nonchalant expression. "There are quite a lot of rumors about you on the internet recently." "Auntie, the rumors aren't real. I was deceived by someone else." Today, Willow had come to the Lucas family's mansion to explain and clarify herself. "Father hates me completely now. He even took Vena's management rights away from me. I can only try my best to please Madame Lucas to find myself more opportunities." Larissa carried the cat in her arms and handed it to the housekeeper. She then squatted down to feed the cat as soon as the housekeeper took the cat from her. After that, she picked up a cup of coffee on the table. "You look and feel so different from your mother that I sometimes wonder if you're her daughter at all." Chapter 156. A glimmer of sulkiness flashed across Willow's eyes. Willow's face was pale. "Auntie, I know I'm inferior to my mother. You should also know that my mother died when I was very young. All right." There was a hint of impatience in Larissa's eyes. "Just behave yourself and keep your nose clean in the future. Don't embarrass your mother. Your grandfather will definitely not like your overcompliant personality. The women of the De Arma family always have to be tough, but judging from how you're carrying yourself, you'll never amount to anything." "Understood," Willow responded while clenching her fist. "Would I stay here and take all this nonsense from her?" "You can go back now if there's nothing else. I'm tired and need to get some rest already." Larissa got up from the couch and went upstairs. Willow came out of the Lucas family's mansion with a solemn face. Madame Lucas' attitude toward her had made her feel extremely disturbed. Identities don't come by so easily. I have to get rid of Madame Lucas' suspicion. If only. The comers of Willow's lips were coldly curled. As long as I can get that bitch's hair and take the initiative to ask Madame Lucas to run a DNA test, as long as I can be verified as a collateral blood relative, my position in the family will be secured. In the evening, Nolan parked his car outside the gate of the Vanderbilt Manor and turned to look at Maisie, who looked extremely hesitant. You really don't plan to go in? I didn't say that I wanted to go in. He had actually brought her to the Vanderbilt Manor without asking her right after they got off work. The corners of Nolan's lips twitched and were slightly raised. You might say that you don't care. But you still watched Steven's apology video earlier today. In fact, you still care about your father deep down. Maisie did not say anything. She had been indeed disappointed by her father's distress and even blamed him for his infidelity to his marriage. But her father's words from the other day were still lingering in her heart. Do I hate him? It doesn't seem to be. Perhaps it was because he was the only person who was related to her apart from the 3 children. Get out of the car, no matter what. You're still the daughter of the Vanderbilts. With me here, no one will make your life difficult. Maisie took a glance at him and said, even if you were not here, I wouldn't let myself suffer in there. She opened the door and got out of the car. Nolan was a little distressed. Can this woman soften her attitude just once, at least, give me a chance to protect my wife? Forget it, nobody forced me to be such an ass. I actually misunderstood and threatened her back then, when Maisie returned to Vanderbilt Manor and stepped into the lobby through the door. Everyone in the living room was astonished. Layla's expression changed slightly. Why would this bitch come back all of a sudden? Madame Vanderbilt and Linda stared at Maisie, the former's expression looking unpleasant. Pfft, you still know how to get back to your own home? Linda was surprised. Is she Maisie? It's only been a short while since we last met, and she's become so good-looking. Maisie crossed her arms and asked, with a calm tone, why can't I come back? At that moment, the man who entered through the door caused Layla's expression to change once again. Mr. Goldman. Madame Vanderbilt was even more dissatisfied when she saw that Maisie had brought a man back to the manor. You even dare to bring a random man back home now? Mother. He's Mr. Goldman. Layla cowardly reminded Madame Vanderbilt in an extremely soft voice. When Madame Vanderbilt heard the word Mr. Goldman, the disdain on her face was replaced by surprise in an instant, and she slowly stood up. Madame Vanderbilt's personality did a 180 in an instant. Oh, Z, why didn't you tell us in advance that you were bringing Mr. Goldman back home for a visit? Maisie scoffed. Grandma, didn't you just refer to him as a random man? Chapter 157. Madame Vanderbilt was a little embarrassed, so she could only say, aren't I a little too old to come to such a conclusion at one glance? Madame Vanderbilt was puzzled too. This cheap girl is able to invite Mr. Goldman home? Didn't they say that Willie is the one who has a better relationship with Mr. Goldman? Linda's nervousness was different from what Madame Vanderbilt and Layla felt. She had been unable to take her eyes off Nolan ever since the moment she first saw him. This man is so handsome. He's several times more good-looking than all the men that I've met before this. Z. Stephen, who was walking downstairs, was slightly startled when he saw her. He thought she would never want to come back again. I brought Mr. Goldman over for dinner, is that okay? Maisie looked at her father and was surprised to find that he seemed to look a lot more haggard than before. She could even see his gray hair, which was not so discernible before. Madame Vanderbilt hurriedly stepped forward before Stephen could respond to Maisie's question. Of course. That's not a problem. It's the Vanderbilt's honor that Mr. Goldman is able to come to our place for dinner. She then got Layla to go to the back and ask the servants to prepare a few more dishes. Maisie. A pure-looking lady approached bashfully, stretched out her hand, held Maisie's hand, and secretly glanced at Nolan, who was standing next to her. "Maisie, we haven't seen each other for many years, do you still remember me?" Maisie did not respond because she did not recognize her. Madame Vanderbilt quickly explained, "Lynn, your cousin hasn't returned to her hometown for so many years, so how could she still remember you?" "Z, she's your cousin, Linda, you met each other when you were young." "Linda?" Maisie recalled a thing or two, but that was when she was a few years old. Linda should have just been born. She's grown this big now. "Oh, so you're Linda." Maisie's attitude was still rather indifferent. She had seen all the people's attitudes from the extended Vanderbilt family before this, so she did not feel close to them at all. Madame Vanderbilt continued to flatter Nolan at the dining table, while Linda kept on peeking at him from time to time as if she had found her Prince Charming. Layla could no longer sit still. Madame Vanderbilt had been under the impression that Willow was the person who was the closest to Mr. Goldman. I'm glad that you're still willing to come home for dinner," Stephen said slowly and softly as if he was afraid of frightening her. Maisie stopped her actions for a split second, lowered her head, and continued to eat. "Since the Vanderbilts don't welcome me, I can't always come over shamelessly." "Oh, Z, what are you saying? You're the granddaughter of the Vanderbilts, why would we not welcome you?" Madame Vanderbilt's sudden enthusiasm caught Maisie off guard, and she could not get used to it for a while. "Hypocrite, this is too hypocritical." Maisie lifted her gaze. "Wouldn't you chase me out of this house if Mr. Goldman wasn't here with us?" Madame Vanderbilt choked because of that statement. Although she was embarrassed publicly, she could not throw a tantrum as Mr. Goldman was here. In the past, if Maisie was disrespectful to her elders, Stephen would be the first to slam the table and reprimand her, but he did not do so today. Nolan fetched Maisie a piece of meat, his gaze filled with affection. "Don't just eat your pasta, eat some meat too." Seeing that Nolan was fetching side dishes for Maisie and glancing at her so lovingly, Linda could not help but bite her lower lip. While she was envious of Maisie, she also felt jealous. "Why can I find such a handsome and rich man?" Madame Vanderbilt did not expect that Maisie would be so intimate with Mr. Goldman. She glared at Layla all of a sudden. Her eyes looked as if they were blaming Layla for everything. Layla was furious deep down. But how would she dare to vent her spleen at this moment? Chapter 158. Madame Vanderbilt asked, "Mr. Goldman, what is your relationship with Z?" Nolan replied nonchalantly, "Z is my fiancé, what's the matter?" "Fiancé?" Madame Vanderbilt was astounded. "I didn't expect this cheap slut to be the person who really has her head in the game. She's actually managed to become Mr. Goldman's woman." "Z, why didn't you tell your family that you're engaged to Mr. Goldman?" Maisie scoffed inwardly. "I don't want to be bothered." If it wasn't for Nolan's identity, why would she act like this? To put it bluntly, isn't the only thing that she has her eyes on Nolan's identity and status? "Then when will you marry me?" Maisie almost choked due to Nolan's sudden proposal. She then turned her head to look at him. "Do you have a death wish?" "I'm just playing along, Z, indeed, you're no longer young anymore. It's time for you to get married too. Since Mr. Goldman loves you so much, what are you waiting for?" Judging solely from Mr. Goldman's family background, as Maisie's grandmother, "I'll definitely benefit from the news if this cheap slut were to get married to Mr. Goldman. My status in the upper-class circle will also rise by folds if I become in-laws with the Goldmans. Even if I were to get married, it has nothing to do with you." Maisie gave off a polite smile, slapping Madame Vanderbilt in the face metaphorically. Madame Vanderbilt was incensed deep down, but she still reacted very kindly on the surface. "Z, no matter what, I'm still your grandmother, so how could you say that?" "Mother, Z is old enough to make her own decisions already. So let's not get too involved," Stephen said slowly. That implied that he respected Maisie's choice. "What are you talking about? Z is your daughter. How can you not care about your daughter's major life event?" Madame Vanderbilt's face betrayed her displeasure upon seeing that her son did not even speak up for her. "I'm not in the position to say anything about it, and neither are you." Stephen sounded very determined. Seeing that Stephen was dead set on supporting Maisie, the hatred in Layla's heart increased. Ever since he learned what Willow has done and about the incident related to that whore, Marina de Arma, Stephen really has turned toward this bitch. If I still can't give birth to a son, then how can I secure my status in the Vanderbilts in the future? Maisie did not expect her father to make such an exception to speak up for her. After all, he had never taken her side in the past 10 years. Nolan held her restless, clenched fist that was resting on her thigh. Maisie was taken aback and took a glance at Nolan. "Indeed, this is Z's decision. You cannot call the shots on a matter like this. After all, I can still remember the grievances that she had to suffer here in the Vanderbilts matter." Nolan's cold response made both Madame Vanderbilt and Layla look extremely distressed, while it made Stephen feel ashamed. The meal was finished in a very depressing atmosphere. Nolan turned a blind eye to everyone else and only fetched Maisie some side dishes from time to time. His attitude toward Maisie was totally different from how he treated them. Stephen did not say anything, but he was very relieved deep down. He had had the wrong impression of Maisie for so many years because of Layla and Willow. So he was more or less relieved now that he saw Nolan taking such good care of her. "Dad, why don't I see Willow here?" Hearing Maisie call himself Dad, Stephen was astonished. He was also somewhat delighted deep down. Still, his expression did not look too good when he mentioned Willow. "She's been going out very early in the morning and returning home late at night recently. I'm not very sure where she goes, but don't worry about her." Layla bit her lip. "Don't worry about her." Heh, sure enough. He's no longer treating Willow as his daughter anymore. Had she not been able to talk about the Lucas family, she would have told everyone about it a long time ago. Chapter 159. After dinner, Madame Vanderbilt suggested that Nolan and Maisie should stay in the Vanderbilt manor for one night. Maisie wanted to refuse, but Nolan agreed to do so. Madame Vanderbilt was very pleased to see that Nolan was willing to stay. "Mr. Goldman, please let me know at any time if you have any needs. Treat this as your own home." Seeing that Nolan was ignoring her, the old lady smiled awkwardly. Maisie wanted to say something, but Nolan looked at her and said, "I want to take a look at your former room." "My former room?" Maisie was flustered. She had left Vanderbilt Manor for 6 years and had indeed never come back to stay here since then. Stephen opened his lips and said slowly, "Z's room has not been touched, so I'll arrange for someone to clean it up now." Later on, Maisie arrived at the room she had been living in the past. The room layout was still the same as before, and many items and furniture had not been moved. It was just that the bed in the room looked a little smaller when compared to the bed in Nolan's room. Nolan scrutinized Maisie's former room, and his gaze stopped on the photos placed on the cabinet. They were all photos taken when Maisie had still been a kid. The woman looked very adorable when she was a young girl, and she looked just like Daisy. "Don't look." Maisie grabbed the photo frame in his hand and hid it in her arms. She even hid those photos behind her. Nolan's eyebrows were raised slightly. "What's wrong with me going through the photos of my woman when she was a child? I told you not to look, so just don't look." "Are you shy?" Maisie was rendered speechless. She just thought those photos looked very ugly, and she was too embarrassed to show them to others. Nolan did not force her further. He only took a look around her room, then walked to the bed and sat down. "Your room is well furnished." Maisie shoved all the photos into the cabinet, turned around, and looked at him. "Mr. Goldman, my bed is quite small, you should just dash." The man did not listen to her at all and laid down directly. Maisie was lost for words. This bag is really shameless. That night, Maisie turned her closet upside in search of something to wear. The clothes that were left were clothes that she owned back when she was attending high school, and she had not worn them for a long time. Fortunately, her pajamas from that period could still be worn. But what about that bag? Nolan took off his jacket, and he was only left with a shirt. It seemed that he was planning to take a bath. Maisie suddenly remembered something and stood up to stop him. Nolan was caught off guard and had no idea what she was doing. Maisie grabbed his arms, pushed him back to the bed, sat him down, and gnashed her teeth. "I'll go ask my dad to see if he has a pair of pajamas that fit you. Give me a minute." She had almost forgotten there was no pair of pajamas that he could change into here, and she did not want to see him sleep naked. The comers of Nolan's lips could not help but rise upon seeing Maisie rush out of the room. Maisie reached her father's room and heard Layla's voice coming from the inside when she was about to knock on the door. "What's wrong with me wanting to give birth to a son for you? The Vanderbilts will need a boy to pass down their legacy. Dear, do you dislike me now? Give birth to a son?" Maisie frowned. Layla is over 40 years old already, and she still wants to have a son with dad at this age. Is that something that we can control? Z and the others are here now. Are you crazy? Stephen's reprimanding voice came from the other side of the door. Layla sobbed softly. "I think you've started to dislike me." Stephen was annoyed. "Rather than thinking about other things, I would appreciate it if you could spend more time disciplining that daughter of yours." "Okay, I'll sleep in Willie's room tonight." Layla opened the door furiously only to run into Maisie standing at the door. She gave her a vicious glare. Maisie raised an eyebrow while looking at her. Stephen ignored Layla, but he was stunned for a split second when he saw Maisie standing at the door. "Z, why are you?" Chapter 160. Nolan doesn't have pajamas, so I'm here to ask if you have any that fit him. Stephen smiled. "I just bought one pair some time ago, and I haven't worn it. I'll get it for you." Stephen brought Maisie the new pair of pajamas. When Maisie turned around and was about to leave, Stephen walked out of the room. "Z." Maisie turned her head. "What's the matter?" "It is I who mistreated you." "It's okay, Dad." Maisie looked down, turned around, and walked toward the room without looking at Stephen's pale expression. Stephen felt extremely heavy-hearted. Even though he knew that his daughter had yet to forgive him, he was content that she still called him Dad. Maisie, who was walking back to the room, saw a woman standing outside the door of her room all of a sudden. It was Linda. She did not know what Linda was saying to Nolan, but it could be seen that she was giving off a bashful and happy expression. She acted extremely cautiously in front of him. But the tiny hint of joy on her face made Maisie quickly realize that Linda had a thing for Nolan. Nolan turned his head and noticed Maisie's return, so his eyebrows raised slightly. "You've come back?" Maisie scoffed inwardly. "If I were not to come back, how would I get to witness you chatting with Linda so joyfully?" "Yeah." Maisie shoved the pajamas into his hands. "These are new, nobody has worn them before." Seeing Maisie's disturbed expression, Linda explained carefully, "Maisie, don't misunderstand. I was talking about you with Mr. Goldman just now." Maisie looked at her and chuckled. "I didn't misunderstand." After speaking, she deliberately knocked Nolan away from the doorway and walked into the room. Nolan noted how the petite woman reacted just now. "That's how she reacts when she says she didn't misunderstand us. She's jealous, for sure." "That, Mr. Goldman. Your cousin and I are going to rest already." Nolan's attitude turned indifferent immediately, and he closed the door before Linda could speak. Linda froze in place, clenching her hands subconsciously. What's the matter? His attitude was evidently different earlier. Why would he become so indifferent as soon as Maisie returned? She bit her lip and was secretly pleased with the thought of something. I deliberately talked about Maisie in order to approach him, and his attitude toward me wasn't very indifferent when Maisie was absent. Does this mean that I have a chance too? In the room, Nolan changed into the pajamas and walked out of the bathroom. The corners of his lips could not help but twitch upon seeing that Maisie was lying on the bed with her back facing him. He leaned beside her, laid on his side with his hand propped against his head, and looked at her. "Are you jealous?" Maisie turned her head around and looked back at him with a puzzled expression. "What are you thinking about?" "Since when am I jealous? He can talk to whomever he wants to," he laughed. "If you're not jealous, then you're definitely angry." Maisie sat up and said seriously, "Nolan, please don't be so narcissistic. I'm just irritated because I can't figure something out. It has nothing to do with you." She then laid back after saying her piece. She could not understand why she would feel a little torn and was pricking her heart after saying that. Maisie noticed that Nolan had not moved for a long time, so she turned her head slightly. "It's because of my father." Nolan's eyes lit up as she was trying to explain herself. He then picked up a strand of hair with his fingertips and wrapped it around his finger. "I know. But I won't take a fancy to any other woman except you." He had just wanted to check Maisie's reaction. Otherwise, he would not have chatted with that woman deliberately and waited for her to come back. Although Maisie acted and responded very stubbornly, Nolan could tell that she cared about him a little bit. Maisie did not utter another word and slept with her back facing him. Nolan hugged her in his arms from behind, with his body pressing against her back. Maisie frowned slightly, froze in his arms, and did not dare move a muscle.